Morning, fellas.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here today. Let's go ahead and open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the privilege that we have of being able to share your word with your people, being able to proclaim the gospel. And Father, we thank you for the promises that we have, that your word doesn't return void, that your gospel changes hearts, calls forth faith, and leads to everlasting life. Father, as we discuss preaching, we pray that you would bless our conversation today, and we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. This is Making Messages Memorable, and we're glad that you're here. Let's just start with a time of mass confession, because we are Lutherans and we do like mass confession all the time, and we'll do it by just hand raising, okay? How many of you in here have ever had trouble, like on a particular week, preparing for a sermon? Raise your hand. Okay. So you've had like a bad week, right? Or maybe a bad month, or a bad year, or a bad decade, or something like that, right? Bad ministry, yeah. Sometimes it can get a little bit tricky. And so that's kind of the honest admission on the front end. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about that throughout the course of this morning's conversation. Really, when it comes to preaching, I would say that there are a couple of sides to preaching. The first is what you say. And this is the message of the gospel. This is the message of Holy Scripture. This is the content of the message that you're delivering. And ladies, gentlemen, that is incredibly important. It needs to be scripturally based. It needs to be Christ-centered. All of those things. The content needs to be absolutely clearly pointing to the cross and to Christ. Now, the other side of this, however, is how you say it. This is kind of the art of rhetoric, because there are good ways to say things and there are not so good ways to say things. There are engaging ways to say things and there are not so engaging ways to say things. And I'll just tell you right up front, okay? Your rhetoric, how you say things, is not going to save anyone from sin, right? Jesus does that. The proclamation of the gospel engenders faith in the hearts of people. So, how you say things is not going to save anybody from sin, but it may save someone from being bored, and that's kind of important too. And so we're going to kind of discuss both sides of this. What you say and how you say it. And so, let's just start here, just so we're clear, what a sermon is not. And this is kind of a theology of sermonizing, a little bit of philosophical framework here, that is just important for us to, you probably know this, but just to kind of keep it clear in the back of your mind. Number one, a sermon is not just informational. Okay? You can get into all sorts of isagogical issues, talk about context in the first century, and Greeks and Romans and Jews, and how they all related to each other in different religious groups, and on and on and on. You can parse lots of Greek and Hebrew words, and you can give people a ton of information. And that's good, but if the sermon doesn't have Christ, it's not a sermon. Okay, a sermon is also not just inspirational. So we're not just talking like, okay, 5 steps to have a better family life, 10 steps to get your finances in order, 28 steps to get yourself in shape in a biblical way. Okay, listen, the Bible has lots of inspirational stuff, and it does tell you how to do stuff, and that's good, but if it doesn't have Christ, right, it's not a sermon. One of my favorite books by a guy named Philip Reef came out in 1966. It was called The Triumph of the Therapeutic. And Philip Reef gets at this geniusly when he says, religious man was born to be saved. Psychological man is born to be helped. And here's the idea, or he's born to be pleased. Here's the idea. In pastoral ministry, do we want to help people, yes or no?
Yeah.
All right, I'm hoping that we can try this again. Okay, in pastoral ministry, do we want to help people? Yes or no? Yes, absolutely. Right? Okay, if they're going through marriage struggles, do you want to help them? Yeah. Okay, if they're going through big existential questions about God, do you want to help them? Yes. Okay, if they have questions about Scripture, do you want to help them? Yes. But sometimes helping them is not always pleasing them. Okay? And if you're just doing inspirational stuff, it may be very pleasing, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's preaching. Because finally, preaching points to the cross, points to Jesus, points to salvation. And so, this leads me to what a sermon finally is. A sermon is transformational. Here's what I mean, right? A sermon is meant to point people from death to life, from condemnation to salvation, from their own sinfulness to their Savior and what he offers and what he does and who he is. And so with that being said then, a message does have layers that incorporate all three of these things, but finally lead to that one thing, which is Jesus. And so a message does have some explication to it. You want to explain some things. For example, if you were preaching through a text and Jesus comes across a Syrophoenician woman, right? And Jesus is having a conversation with her and he says, hey, it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. If you don't explain what in the world Jesus is talking about there, that's a problem. If you're not honest and you go, what is this? This doesn't really seem like something Jesus would normally say. Did he wake up on the wrong side of the manger? What's going on here? If you don't just take a little bit of time to tease that out in its context, explain it, people are going to walk out of the church on Sunday morning going, I have no idea what was going on in that text. It's good to explain things. That's not all you do, but you want to explain things. Second of all, you do want to apply things. This is kind of the inspirational side of things. And the way that I look at application is this. You really don't have to apply the Bible, but you do want to show how the Bible applies. I call it passive application. You don't need to pull any tricks out of your hat to apply the Bible, because the Bible does apply. It does speak to people. It speaks to you. Just make that real explicit and clear. And then finally, you want proclamation. This is Jesus. This is what he's done. This is why it matters. And this is for you. And so it includes all of these things, and it lands here. It lands with Jesus. So that's kind of like the broad-based theology of preaching. Hopefully you've heard at least a few of these things before. Now, that's the broad-based theology of preaching. Can I ask you to keep a couple of things in mind when it comes to preaching to your congregation and when it comes to your people? Ask yourself 4 questions. First question, what do I want people to learn? This is the question of explication. This is the question of just getting into the text and explaining cultural context and Greek words and Hebrew words and all of that kind of stuff. Here's the way that I try to explain it to people. When it comes to you, okay, I want you to think high and read high and study high and communicate low. So, challenge yourself, okay? If the only book that you've read in the last 15 years is Chicken Soup for the Soul, there's a problem, okay? Challenge yourself just a little more to think deeply about theological issues. Read things you got to read twice because it's hard and you're wondering what in the world this dead German is talking about. That's good stuff. And then figure out ways to communicate that in a way that is impactful and engaging to your congregation. Now, with that being said, when I say communicate low, here's what I don't mean. I don't mean communicate to the lowest common denominator. It's okay, just like you're challenging yourself, it's okay to challenge people. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you challenge them to think and don't intimidate them by your thinking. Because once you just start intimidating people, going, oh, I know this and I know that, and I can talk over your head or talk circles around you, or I can make myself sound really, really smart, people will check out, and quite frankly, they're going to be offended. And so challenge yourself and challenge others when it comes to thinking. That's what you want people to learn. Second, what do you want people to do? This is kind of the sanctification question, and it's my own bias, but it's really okay to ask people to do stuff in your sermons. It's just fine. If you don't believe me, just read the second half of any of Paul's letters, all right? And you'll see this over and over and over again. It's okay to say, hey, be loving. Hey, serve others. Hey, be generous. Paul does it all the time. Okay? Now, if all you're doing is telling people to do stuff and not telling them what Christ has done, that's a problem. But it's okay to tell people to do stuff. Third, what do I want people to feel? In seminary, we learned a couple of fancy words that are kind of helpful to understand feelings, okay? We learned about the magisterial use of things and the ministerial use of things. Okay, a magisterial use of something is something that rules everything else, okay? Think majesty. A ministerial use of something is something that serves other things. Think ministry. That's what ministry is. Ministry is service. Okay, feelings are important not magisterially, but ministerially. Okay? In other words, feelings can actually serve things. Feelings can actually serve actions. Feelings can actually serve faith. Feelings can serve a lot of different things in people's lives. Now, if they rule everything, that's a disaster, because all it takes is one bad day and all of a sudden things fall apart. But because people have feelings, they do, even the people you think don't have feelings, right, actually do have feelings. You want to engage those feelings so that they serve the greatest things in life. They serve the most important and profound things in their lives. And so do ask the question, well, how are people going to feel when I say this? Because here's the thing. If they wind up feeling offended, there's a good chance that it's okay to offend, but if you inadvertently offend or just crassly offend or think that somehow you have become extra special holy because you've offended, you've actually just caused people to check out. It's a problem. Finally, what do I want people to believe? Okay, and this is the big one, right? This is the proclamation. This is the Jesus. This is the repent and believe the gospel. Never forget this. Because if your preaching doesn't lead to this, it leads to nothing.
One of the things that I've found helpful in some of the sermon preparation is a thing that I've discovered in conversation with people who understand Old Testament Hebrew worldview and culture. And it becomes, at least for me, some questions that I've learned to ask myself that really do kind of come back and connect to this. And it's the idea of the Hebrew view of the mind. So that when you are looking through the Old Testament and reading this, and the Word of God is speaking into the hearts and minds of Hebrew people, the Old Testament Hebrew people had the view of the mind. It was connected together in three component parts. One was cognition, and that gets into the issue of what we learn, what we understand, and those kinds of things. So it's about cognition. The second part of the Hebrew mind is that of volition. It has to do with the choices and the things that we're going to do with what we know is true. And the third part of the ancient Hebrew mind is that of memory. So as I'm thinking about, particularly if I'm preaching from an Old Testament text, and I'm trying to make this as contextual as possible, I want to understand what it is that word is saying that it wants me to learn, what it is that it wants me to do with what I'm learning, and how I'm going to make this a part of my functional memory as a person of God. And that connects with the feelings and all of those sorts of things. So just a helpful, at least for me, three views of what it is that, from addressing the mind, what it is that the message is going to engage.
So, talked a little bit about basic framework, theological, philosophical preaching. I want to talk a little bit about how preaching in the biblical text intersects and interacts with culture. Just out of curiosity, you guys read newspapers? Magazines? Do you watch cable news channels and give yourself a headache? Okay, yeah. So you watch cable news, you read newspapers, read magazines. Okay. This is actually important. I'm going to ask you to do something. If you don't, do. Okay, here's why. Your people generally do. And even scarier, they actually believe some of the stuff that they read. Okay? So, when Newsweek comes out with an article a couple of months ago that is basically a tirade against Christianity and paints Christians as backward, upside down, ridiculous hicks, you need to know that some people read that and actually think, oh yeah, that's who Christians are. You need to know what folks are thinking so that you can respond to folks who are thinking in certain ways. And so please, read your newspapers, read your magazines, watch your cable news. Try to figure out what it is out there that you need to know about, because here's the secret. Everything that is out there, makes its way into your pews about once a week. Unless you think that everything that is out there is not in here like in you, oh, a lot of it is, right? Because here's the thing. Culture isn't just what's out there. We actually operate in culture. And we actually have things that are from culture. And if we can't understand ourselves and understand others, it's going to be really, really hard to do contextual preaching. Now, when it comes to broader culture, and let me kind of set a few parameters here. What I mean by broader culture, you may think of this as popular culture with an edge of secularism to it, okay? So when it comes to that kind of broader milieu, that broader culture, there are three things that you may want to consider when it comes to how you interact with culture. One is sometimes you just need to confront it. And you need to say, hey, that ain't no good. So when a movie comes out a couple of weeks ago called 50 Shades of Grey, it's really okay if you say, no. Don't go see it. And sometimes you just need to say it that clear, okay? Make your bottom line, your top line, your first statement, and just lead with that and say, that's not appropriate, and then give them the why. Explain, here's why. Sometimes, because here's the thing, if you try to wade into it, and you aren't just kind of clear at the front end, your message may actually, your bottom line may actually get lost. And so sometimes, just confront it. Second thing, sometimes you want to converse with culture. Tim Keller in his book Center Church has a very helpful philosophy on this. He distinguishes between A beliefs and B beliefs. A beliefs are beliefs that Christianity shares with broader pop and secular culture. A couple of examples. Human trafficking is bad. Christians would say that. Broader pop secular culture would say that. Okay? Or killing people, like terrorism, ISIS, is bad. Christians would say that. Broader pop secular culture would say that. B beliefs are where Christians and broader pop secular culture are at odds with each other. So, kind of the classic example here would be something like abortion. Christians say, you know what? There is something precious about life that needs to be preserved because it's a gift and a miracle of God. Now, not everyone in broader pop culture, but there is a large contingent that says, wait just a second. There's something else going on here that involves a bunch of other things. And so here's what Tim Keller says. He says, use A beliefs to get to B beliefs. Okay, actually show how what everybody agrees on actually logically ends up where Christians stand. Let me give you an example. Divorce. Okay, the scripture is clear, right? When you make a commitment to someone, it's good to keep that commitment. And there are a lot of people who will say, wait just a second, you don't understand my situation. I had this affair, and this girl is my soulmate, and I'm so glad I got out of that first marriage because it was just too hard, and it was never going to work out, and the spark was gone, the sizzle turned to fizzle, and I'm so happier with this other girl over here. That's not right. That contradicts Scripture. And so the question becomes, how do you use an A belief to get to a B belief? Well, here's an A belief when it comes to divorce. Okay? Divorce stinks. It's painful. It's painful. There's not a single person who on their wedding day walks down the aisle and goes, this is going to be a wreck. Nobody thinks that way. Everybody kind of wants the story of happily ever after till death do you part. Okay, that's good and right, meet and salutary. Start there, and then say, now do you see why God says divorce is wrong? Okay? We share this A belief. Now, do you see how a B belief may naturally and logically flow from this A belief? God says it's wrong because he knows that it breaks his plan and his design. And when you do that, you know what happens? A whole bunch of pain, heartbreak, and heartache. And so by the very fact that this was tragic for you in your life in some way, by the very fact that you wrecked and ruined a lot of other people if you went off with your soulmate, should tell you a little something about how right or wrong it is. Use the A belief to get to the B belief. This is having a conversation with culture. Third, there are some things that you just want to concede. Okay? Because remember, who created culture? Who created it? God did, right? He created it when he made Eve, and you got Adam and Eve, and all of a sudden you got two people, and you got culture, because you got interactions, you got relationships, you got communication, you got all the things that culture takes. Now, when God made it, in Genesis 1, he said something about it. It is what? Good. Okay, so not everything in culture is bad. And if it's good to say that. It's really good to say that. And so if it corresponds with God's word, just say, yeah, let's keep going in that direction. Celebrate the good stuff. Don't just confront the bad stuff.
One of the things when we talk about this whole idea of confronting, conversing, conceding, that I think is important for us to remember, we have an advantage. You know, we're not a consultant. We're not just a keynote speaker who comes in and does a one-shot thing. Most of us are engaging our congregations week in and week out. So they not only have a personal relationship with us in terms of greeting each other and knowing each other, they have a relationship with us as their pastor, their preacher, right? And so we need to develop that and cherish that and understand that as we gain credibility, we have the opportunity for them to learn to know us and trust us, not just because we're proclaiming the Word of God, but because as their pastor, we love them. We're concerned about them. That we're not up here in this to somehow carry moral authority. We're in this because what God has to say is important, and we love them enough to tell them the truth. That results in giving us a lot of leeway to confront things, and a lot of credibility that when we do confront things, they understand that we're not just beating on the pulpit, but we're actually concerned about their soul and their well-being. And so it's one of those special things about pastoral ministry that we sometimes, I think, in humility, we set it aside. We underestimate the importance of who we are to our people, not in an egotistical way, but in a real way that what we say matters. The things that we say, if we love them and we demonstrate that love in every way, including our preaching, that they can hear things from us that they might not be able to hear from other people, and they certainly would be able to hear from a one-shot kind of a presentation.
One of the things that I find helpful and frankly quite necessary is the fact that I do live in culture. There's a culture that surrounds me. It affects my paradigms of life and reality. I have a worldview. And the assumption, the easy assumption of what your worldviews and paradigms and cultures are is that everybody kind of shares that. You know, and everybody kind of understands that. And one of the things that I find as I'm thinking about a message, as I have the privilege of standing before people on a Sunday morning to bring a sermon, is that I really don't know how other people necessarily are thinking or perceiving what's taking place in a text. And so it's very important to me, if I understand that God so loved the world, it's a way of suggesting that the gospel is always broadband. And I have to tell you what, when I think of who I am always a narrow width band, okay, because of my culture. So a part of what I try to do is allow other parts of the culture to speak into my life. That's what Zach is saying when he's saying, what news channels do you listen to? What news stories? Be informed about what's taking place. But I think of it as a guy now who's been in the ministry for over 40 years and recognize that there are people who are in their 20s that think differently from me. So it's very important for me, if I want to be effective in reaching people and having any kind of exchange at a human level. I'm not speaking to some sort of absence of the Holy Spirit here or something like that. But if I want to engage their thinking and bring them into a place where the Holy Spirit begins to do that work of transformation, I need to know something about how they understand the reality that the text is referencing. I'm not a female. I need to have a female perspective that speaks into my life, so that when a magazine like Christianity Today comes out and says, these are the top 100 most influential millennial postmodern thinkers in the world today. One of the things that I did on that list was to go over for each one of them and to read the biographies that were in that article and then go online and see what they've written. And to select from that list of top 100 about 6 books and 2 blog sites that I regularly visit because I need to hear from those folks. Otherwise, I have to assume that left to my own devices, what people are going to get is the gospel wrapped up in the worldview, paradigm, and language of Steve Wagner. And that's always coming up short. So I just encourage you. I need to have young women who are thoughtful and blogging. I need to get on that blog site and read what they're saying. I need to read the books of people out of cross-cultural context and young men and women who are also thinking about taking the world with the idea and the faith and the business concepts that they have and listening to them, listening to the language, listening to the mental model that drives the language, trying to understand who they are, so that I am constantly in this tension of trying to broaden the view of the gospel that I'm privileged to communicate. And I can't do that left to my own device. I simply can't do that.
Can I give you a danger? This goes back to those hard times, the weeks, the months, the years, the decades, the ministry, right, where it just seems a little hard to get a sermon ready to go into the pulpit on Sunday morning, to get a lesson ready to go into whatever context you have on a particular weekend. Sometimes what can happen is that we can get ourselves into ruts. I talked about this yesterday when we were doing a session on sermon series planning. And ruts are basically when you go to the same texts and talk about them in the same way. Now, you can go to the same texts over and over and over again because the Bible's a really good book. I'm sure you've heard that before, okay? But if you never learn anything new about the text, if you never think about the text in a different way, if you never read different theologians, if you never do the work, okay, to say anything different about that text in a different way, you've basically gotten into a rut. Or if you have all these different texts, and no matter what the text is, you're just kind of saying the same thing every single Sunday because you haven't really studied up on anything, you haven't learned anything new, you're in a rut. Now, with that being said, there's a big important difference between a rut and a pattern. Patterns are needed. You need a pattern to get stuff done. Patterns help you carry out things efficiently and effectively. Okay? You have a pattern in the morning, right? You get up and you brush your teeth and you take a shower and you skip breakfast and you get a donut at best practices and there you go. That's a pattern. Okay? We all need patterns. You need patterns for sermon preparation. Like my pattern, I teach adult Bible class at Concordia on Sunday mornings. So I have a pattern which is basically the Thursday before the Sunday that I'm going to do the adult Bible class. I begin to study a particular text and I journal about it. And then Thursday into Friday, do some more studying, more journaling. Maybe late Friday afternoon and then into the weekend, I begin to type out an hour-long lecture. And I really do type the whole thing out because I'm crazy. And so I type through it, and then before that final Sunday that I give it, I walk through it twice because I need to hear it like out loud, just me and my dog Bandit, before it actually goes into a group of people on a Sunday morning. That way I can figure out just verbally if things aren't quite firing on all fours, and I can try to get it rhetorically as polished as I can possibly make it. Now, that's my pattern. Is it the only pattern? No, it's one pattern.
By the way, I know Bandit, very righteous dog. Knows the Bible well, forwards and backwards. And he's very helpful to Zach because if a sentence ends in a preposition, he bites him in the ankle. So it's a really helpful kind of a thing. For me, the pattern is really useful in that I need to be thinking kind of months out ahead of time. And at Concordia, we spend some time knowing what the big themes are going to be on a given year. So if discipleship is a big theme right now for us, and so I'm able to be thinking about discipleship along the way. Marriage and family is a big theme for us in 2015, and so I'm able to be thinking and reading books and looking for ideas about marriage and family things, which won't show up until May or midsummer, somewhere along the line in that. But I'm already thinking about that and beginning to prepare for it. Zach put it in the context of about a 10-day stretch, which is where my time starts, with a 10-day preparation whether I'm preaching or teaching the Bible class, but particularly when I'm preaching. I don't use notes. I try not to do that. So what is important to me is that after I've done the textual work, which gets into the context and history and the language and the word studies and all that kind of business, is I try to imagine a picture, whatever that text is, to see that text and as a picture. And what I'm doing as I go into the message is simply describing the picture that I have in my mind. I don't need words because I have a picture. And I'm going to tell people about the picture that I see in my mind. Now, I do have outcomes. And there may be 2 or 3 things that I want people to remember that are very, very important. And I will kind of keep those to, I tend to put those into my mind in such a way that I can remember them. But the place where I really work hard in the last 10 days that I have is working on what Zach is going to talk about in a minute about islands and bridges, which is, in the Steve Wagner world, it is on the transitions from one point to the next. To describe those transitions extremely well, to be focused, and to know exactly when this is the point, and this is the way that I take everyone with me to the next point. Because if I'm on the next point or the second point downstream, and everybody's back here at point 1, people may walk out of church and shake my hand and say, "Nice sermon, Pastor," but they're lying through their teeth because they really were just left them in a place of not quite understanding and not getting it. Most honest evaluation that I've ever had of a sermon was one that I knew the dog didn't know how to hunt. And a guy came out and he said, "I really appreciated your effort this morning." And I said, "I love you." So it's that kind of deal. In my preparation, it's the picture, it is the 2 or 3 points, and it is the transitions that requires the work and polishing and reworking and polishing that makes sense so that everybody comes with me. Okay?
You know how when you're raising kids, you got your first child, and you've got this plan and this strategy, and you've got the books and the resources, and you're going to do this perfectly, right? Then by the time you get to 4, like we have, you're just hoping to survive. My pattern for serving preparation, there's an ideal pattern, but honestly, guys, sometimes it just ends up in survival mode. But ideally, the way it works, we preach mostly in series, and so we have big ideas, and there are always things that are out there. But I really try to focus on the series, and we do a sermon abstract, or a series abstract that gives us the theme of the series, the key verse for the entire series, and then it breaks it down. And I take that sermon series, break it down into its individual component parts on a Word document, and then store it in a file so that I have access to it at home or from my phone or wherever I am, and try to make notes and break it apart and think thoughts and sort of have an idea of what's coming. As I get to the individual week, then I'll go back to the text and do whatever language work I need to do with the text, and then let it ruminate. Kind of pour it into my heart, let the Holy Spirit work, and be thinking about the connections that are there, illustrations that are there. One great tool that I use almost on a daily basis is a little app called Instapaper. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before, but if you have a smartphone, there's an application. What it does, because I do most of the reading in blogs and online kinds of things, it lets you save that website, and it takes it automatically to a file that you can access later. It's an extremely useful tool. But then you can go back and find those things. If you don't have time to read the entire thing, but you sort of get the idea this will be useful, it's a great way to save it. Then as we get to the end of the week, we work very collaboratively on sermons and adult Bible class. And so as we get into the Wednesday afternoon through Friday kind of time frame, depending on how the week has gone, then we sit down and talk about the points. We talk mostly, honestly, we spend most of our time talking about the takeoff and landing points of the message, and we talk about the transitions that are happening in the middle, and then we move on and fine tune as we go through literally through the morning on Sunday. Now, that's the ideal. The reality is that sometimes on Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening, I'm scrambling, trying to figure out how all of these thoughts can be put together. And so the ideal is one thing. The reality is that sometimes it's not, well, let's face it, not all of us can be Zach and have it all written out the Monday before we're going to preach on Sunday.
I'm just crazy. That's all it is.
That's true.
Here's kind of the way that I want you to think about this, okay? Patterns and ruts. There's actually not a huge distance between them, okay? And so a rut is simply a pattern without any study or creativity, okay? Where you just don't take the time to actually make the pattern useful to it. Okay, where you fall into this kind of re-entrenchment where you're saying the same thing, same way, over and over and over again. That's a rut. And so, make sure that you got the creativity, you got the study, you got the insight so that your pattern doesn't turn into a rut, because it's not that hard to do. Now, with that being said, let's talk some nuts and bolts stuff when it comes to rhetoric, okay? And so, just a couple of words about clear communication. If you want to communicate clearly, this is the how you say it kind of stuff. Again, doesn't save anybody from sin, but it may save somebody from boredom, and that's good too. Okay? Clear communication is focused. If you don't know what you're talking about, guess what? Nobody else is going to know what you're talking about. This is what Steve said about islands and bridges. This is the way that I visualize it in my head. A sermon is a series of islands and bridges. Islands are your points, okay? This is where you're camping out and digging around in the dirt and you're talking about cultural things and parsing Greek and Hebrew words, and everybody goes, wow, that's amazing. And then you landed with Jesus. And then a bridge is where you transition from one point where you're digging around in the dirt to the next point where you're digging around in the dirt. Now, here's the problem. If you're not very careful with your bridges, and if you don't make every effort rhetorically to take people with you from the island to the next island, over the bridge, you know where they're going to wind up in? In the water. And they're going to drown there. And it's not going to be in the waters of holy baptism. And then it will be bad, because they will not make it to the next island with you. And you're going to be over here, and they're still going to be back over there. And they're going to be wondering where in the world all of this has gone. And what's going to happen is that they're going to tune out at like the most important part of your message, because they're still back here at island number 1 when you're already on to point number 3. And so please, oh please, oh please, carefully craft your bridges. Just from a rhetorical standpoint, it helps so much with clear communication and focused communication. Second thing, clear communication, big believer in this, ought to be timed. Okay? If you have a half-hour sermon, you know how long it should be? Half an hour. Give or take like a couple of minutes actually on either side. It should be like 28 to 32 minutes. It should not be 35 minutes or 40 minutes or 20 minutes. Actually think about how long you're going to communicate. Anybody in here, when you have a funeral service, anybody in here ever have someone give a eulogy at one of those? Anybody in here? Okay. Pastor, want to do the eulogy? Okay. It's going to be 5 minutes. Okay. 27 minutes later, right? They're finishing up. Don't do that. Because if you don't know how long it's going to take to say something, it's not going to be clear. And so no. And by the way, if you're in a team ministry and you know how long something's going to be and you can communicate to your team how long it's going to be, your team is going to be very happy. Because they're going to know what to look for. They're going to know when to get ready for the next part of the service or whatever the case may be. That'll be helpful to them. And it'll be helpful to you because you know how long it takes to say something and you're not just shooting from the hip hoping that maybe you'll hit a mark. If you can't time it, it's probably not clear enough and cogent enough for you to say it. Third thing, make it timely. This is the whole connecting with culture thing. Understand what folks are thinking. Understand what people are believing. You know the dirty secret of pastoring a church, right? They hear from you 1 hour a week. You know who they're hearing from all the other hours of the week? Who knows? And that means that they believe a lot of things that, quite frankly, just aren't true. And so, talk about the things that they're believing.
Why don't you talk about the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll follow.
Okay. On the when it comes to the topic of timed, just going back to point, you know, have you ever been in the midst of a message, and you can feel it going up, man, and it's you hit a long ball, and it's getting better and better, and things are going well, and you keep going, and you just add a little bit more, and all of a sudden something happened in the middle, and now instead of going up, it's on the way down. That's what happens to every message, every communication, if we're not conscious of timing. And one of the things I always talk to if we have seminary guys who are on campus for a semester with us, and they're going to be doing preaching or talking to new pastors who come on staff, one of the things I always encourage them is to make it short. You know, if our normal time is 25 minutes to do sermons, aim to do 15 to 20 minutes. Because the automatic credit that people give to a message is that if the message is shorter, it automatically gets a higher grade, right? And so if you're in a situation where you haven't got the credibility, or if you're still working on your craft and still honing your skills, then err on the side of making it briefer and more to the point, more concise, and you'll get the benefit of the doubt. It'll be a blessing. Any of us, when we go too long, we reach that point where it begins to decline. So we've got to learn, and Zach talks about this, I think it's coming up again in just a minute. We've got to know how we're taking off and how we're landing.
Yeah. One thing too, in terms of just the length, is that's always kind of a moving target in culture, somewhat. It's amazing to me that people would listen for an hour back, you listen to, you hear stories about Spurgeon and other kinds of Whitfield and some other kinds of folks who preached in the public, and they preached for an hour. It was no big deal. But today, technology has changed the way we receive information. It's changed the way the content comes and that sort of thing. And one of the places that I find that's very, very helpful on this issue of timing and content and tying this together is a place called TED Talks. Are you familiar with TED Talks here at all? It's a great model because they have finally honed the art of communicating with people today. And there's a lot of people who are in the fields of communication who have things online that you can download for free that says, this is what makes a great TED Talk. I read that stuff all the time because I want to be not only at my best in terms of communication, but I know that if I can't even consider what the world thinks in terms of effective communication, the probability of me being able to communicate well is diminished significantly. So I want to watch these things, I want to learn from these people, what they're doing, so that I'm able to at least be a voice that people are used to. They have a norm. They've set a norm. This is what good communication is. And if I have no clue what that norm is, the chances of me hitting that are just minimal. I don't want people to dismiss the gospel because I failed to understand what it means to communicate in the medium of today. That's my point in all of this. I don't want to be the one who becomes the blockade, the roadblock to communicating the gospel well. So TED Talk's a great place to learn a little something about that.
Another nuts and bolts. Let's talk illustrations. Here's kind of my fundamental point about illustrations. The fundamental point about illustrations is that illustrations are not just there to make points. Okay, and this is actually incredibly important. Illustrations are multifaceted, multi-layered. So here's what an illustration is not just meant to do, okay? When the father rushed into the burning building to save the cat from the fire, and the cat was rescued, it is like how our God reaches down into this earth to save us from the burning fires of hell. Amen. Hallelujah. Thank you. Hey, apparently that was an illustration that worked, okay? You can gauge your illustrations by how many hallelujahs you get. Okay. But really, illustrations can do a lot more than just that. They're not just there to make one point and you hurry up, get through the illustrations, you can make the point and move on. illustrations can actually be a lot more rhetorically multifaceted than that. So let's just start here with a few types of illustrations, okay? One is kind of the traditional story. You tell a story, and we'll talk about stories where you get them. Stories do not just come from Concordia Pulpit Resources. They can actually come from your life. We'll talk about why that's important here in just a second. You can also do things by way of analogy. Analogies are nice because they're very short, but they also get a point across very well. For example, in the first century, Jews and Samaritans, they didn't mix very well. They were kind of like oil and water. They were like longhorns and wicked people, otherwise known as Aggies. And so you kind of get the sense of the relationship that these two groups of people had. And when you make the analogy, right, some people go, oh, I get it. Some people groan and get upset, but you kind of get the point. Analogies are just quick ways to give people hats to hang their understanding on. Okay? Another way to do an illustration, a list of examples. Lists of examples are incredibly helpful because they give you a crescendo that leads to an aha moment. So let's say you're talking about how God sometimes seems strangely silent, how he seems distant. You can pile up examples of that help people get there in a very effective way. The young woman who has all these friends around her, who always seem to get all their prayers answered, and she has one prayer, that God would heal her of her cancer. And she cries out again and again and again, and you know what? The cancer stays, and she wonders, where is God? The young man who has been looking for a job for 6 months, 9 months, over a year now, and he puts out his resumes, and he goes to interviews, and he asks for God's help, and he cries out, and he is still jobless, and his family's paying the price. And he's wondering, where is God? You pile up example after example after example after example, and then you end by saying, ever been there? And they'll be able to plug themselves into one of those examples. By the way, this is something that Paul does. Have you ever noticed how Paul gives us these huge sin lists? I mean, he names every sin under the sun. And he piles them up, right? He talks about greed, he talks about fornication, he talks about lust, he talks about arrogance, he talks about pride. And he just puts all of these sins together. Why does he do that? So that even if you don't plug yourself into one sin, oh, there's one sin you're going to plug yourself into. Paul does this, just these big lists that help you and convict you because you identify with something in that big list. Okay, third thing, a split story. Split stories are cool because you open the message with one part of the story and you land the message with the second part of the story.
Do you guys use this technique, split stories? Several Easters ago, and we talk about times, by the way, on Easter morning, we've got lots of people there that we don't have the credibility with. Doesn't matter how good a preacher you are, there's still, so on Easter morning, we try to keep messages to 15 minutes. And so trust the fact that it's going to raise the quality and perception of those who are less often there. But we did this a split story thing. Have you heard the name Heather Dorndon? Heather is a runner, professional runner now. But she was in college and she was running for the University of Minnesota. And they were she was in a regional track meet. And she was running the 800-meter dash. She took off and was running this race. She was doing well. She was out in front, leading the pack. And lo and behold, as she came around to complete the first lap of 2 laps, she just stumbled. Literally fell, hands down, all the way down to the ground with her body. And of course, you know what that means, disaster. This woman who looked like she was going to win, looked like she was doing great, all of a sudden stumbles and falls. And the idea is, of course, that's us. In fact, that's how the disciples had to feel, that this was a total loss. They were heartbroken, they were devastated, and we spend a lot of time in that same place because we're all broken. We're all failures in one way or another. Well, we talk about that and relate that to the reality of what our life situation is, and then we come back and we play the second half of the video. We pick it up from that very point where Heather falls and everybody passes her by and she's sort of left there in this forlorn defeat. Because what happens is Heather gets up way behind. Chokes me up even thinking about it this moment. Way behind. And she takes off. And she catches the entire pack and ultimately leans and finishes the race as the winner. Just like us, because of Easter. Because of Christ's death and resurrection for us. And it's a powerful way to sort of, you know the guy who was a master at this? Paul Harvey, right? Everybody know Paul Harvey? The rest of the story. Yeah. Great technique.
These are some basic types. Let's talk about why illustrations matter beyond just that they make a point. And by the way, they should. But there are some other things that are important to illustrations. Number one, they can be used as takeoffs and landings for a message. Sometimes you can dive right into a message, okay? You can say, open your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 1. It's predestination morning at our church. And here we go, and you just go for it. Or, open your hymnals to whatever psalm is there in that section, and we'll talk about that. Okay, sometimes you can do that. Other times, rather than diving in, it's good to kind of wade in. And an illustration helps you do that, just rhetorically. You get people thinking in a certain direction, and then you confirm that direction once you have waded in with God's Word. Okay, illustrations are also helpful for landings because 9 times out of 10, at least in my life, they keep my sermons from crash landing. Okay, and you do not want to crash. You do not want to crash land. That's a bad thing. Because if all of a sudden you're in the middle of a point and you have no way to frame that point at the end to land it, if you're in the middle of this great point about God's grace and you got nothing to say about how God's grace intersects with your life in kind of a very down-home way, people will go, oh yeah, God's grace, amen, okay, bye-bye. And all of a sudden you missed an opportunity to wrap everything back around and to land people gently so that they walk away with something that is very poignant in their minds and in their hearts. Another value of illustrations. I like to think that all the world's a sermon illustration. Okay, first article of the Apostles' Creed, I believe in God the Father Almighty, what? Maker of heaven and earth. Okay, is there anything that God has not made? Is there anything? Okay, maybe mosquitoes. Besides that, is there anything that God has not made? No, He's the maker of heaven and earth. The maker of all. Which means that all that we encounter and all that we have in our lives can be a sermon illustration. This is why I encourage you to tell actually personal illustrations from your own life, because here's what you're doing. You're modeling the way that you want people to see things. If everything is spiritual, if everything is a gift from God, if everything is created by God, and you talk about your life in that way, you know what happens with people? They begin to think about their lives in that way. And all of a sudden, the simple stuff of life becomes incredibly profound because it's from God. We have a fancy theological word for this in the Lutheran Church. What is it? Doctrine of vocation. Everything that we do, everything that we engage in, right? It's not sin. It is a gift from God. And it's something that is connected because it is from God. Okay, let me give you just a simple example of this. When I was preaching a couple of weekends ago, I was talking about the importance of being salt and light in the world. And I talked about a game that I used to play for hours on end in college, a game called 42. And anybody in here ever heard of 42? Yes, okay, good. One person, yes. Okay, 42, oh, 2 people. Okay, so 42 is kind of like hearts or spades, instead of playing it with cards, you play it with dominoes. It's a trump game, and you go around the table and you bid, and whoever gets the winning bid gets to call trump and lead dominoes. And it's a great game, but every once in a while, when I was playing this game, I wouldn't just get a good hand of dominoes, I'd get a perfect hand of dominoes. Okay, I would know that there would be no way that anybody else was going to be able to catch me. And so I'd make some astronomically high bid, and then I'd just take the dominoes, and before I played a single one of them, I'd take my hand and just plop it right down there on the table with a big clunk, and I'd say to my buddies, read 'em in wheat, boys, there ain't no way you're going to be able to catch me. It felt so good, and it was such a holy and righteous moment. A self-righteous moment for me, but nevertheless, it was a fun moment for me. You know, when it comes to what Jesus has called us to be, salt and light in the world. He, because of his gospel, has given us an incredibly winning hand. There's no way that we can lose with Christ. Why? Because, well, he laid his life down on a cross. And so here's the call. Don't hold your hand. Show your hand. Share your hand. Because somebody else needs your hand. That's dominoes. But you know what? Even dominoes, especially 42, is a gift from God. And if you can use just everyday things in your life that kind of connects with what God's word says, your people will learn to do that in their lives, and all of a sudden, their life will take on a whole different significance for them. So that's the value of telling personal illustrations. Long stories. They're good. Not 5 of them in one sermon, okay? And not necessarily every week in every sermon. But long stories are good. This guy is a master at long stories. I was in a Tuesday Bible class with Steve one morning, and he made this point, and it was a good point. And then he launches off on a 20-minute story. Okay? And he includes all sorts of details about weather and people that he met and cars he was driving and lattes he was drinking and all sorts of other things in there. And by the time he got about 10 minutes into the story, honestly, I had forgotten the point that he made at the beginning of the story, but it was a pretty good story. So I was listening and I was tuned in. I was like, okay, well, what's going to happen next? Okay, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And so he tells this whole story, and then at the end of the story, he comes back to the point that he made at the very beginning of the story, but I had forgotten the point because the story was 20 minutes long. But all of a sudden, the point, when he said it at the end of the story, even though it was the same point that he made at the beginning of the story, the point took on a completely different meaning and a completely different frame. And I heard it in a completely different way. And you know what happened that day? I learned the point twice. Because he taught it to me twice with a big story. And when you teach a point twice, you know the old saying, repetition is the mother of what? Learning. Again, you don't need 5 long stories, but if you happen to have a long story, that's okay. Say a word about humor.
Can I just ask quick?
Yeah, sure.
Is it good to make the point before going into the story? Is it better to just go into the story in the sermon?
Yes. Yeah.
No.
Go ahead, Steve.
In that particular instance, it was good to make the point twice because the point became more radical and impactful when it had emotion and story with it. So you make the point, you tell the story, and you come back and make the point again. And as Zach said, you learn it in a different way. It goes deeper because now I have emotion with that point. Now I have new understanding with that point. It's the same thing that in Pentecost when what Peter was doing is referencing back to Joel and then talking about what was happening here. And it was a this is that sort of in terms of rhetoric and communication. This is that. And it helps people to understand it better, more deeply in the context of life. That's what that is.
Humor. Part of the reason that it's helpful is because it's disarming. Okay? This is kind of the ministerial use of feelings. All of a sudden, feelings can actually serve a bunch of different things, okay, including a listening ear, faith in the heart, understanding of something. And so, please, disarm people with humor. And let people into your world with humor. We'll talk about how we're all just a bunch of knuckleheads, and we have stories to back that up that happen to be very funny. And people know that, they can relate to that, and it disarms them because they begin to realize, oh yeah, those guys are like me. Finally, illustrations can serve the purpose of giving people a brain break. Here's what I mean by that, okay? If you are preaching on Ephesians 1 and you're talking predestination and you're having a great time and you're going through Paul's giant prayer at the beginning and you're talking about the difference between, election and foreknowledge and it's just a great time. It's good to give people a break in the middle of that and tell a story just so that people can go, ah. and then they can follow you to where you're going to go next. People need that little intellectual breather, because if you don't give people that little intellectual breather, what's going to happen is that by the time you get to the end of your message, if you haven't given them any sort of intellectual breather, they're going to be totally lost, and they're going to be checked out. So by the time you get to like the big point of Ephesians chapter 1, and you also who are called to the gospel when you believed in Jesus Christ, it's for you, predestination is for you, people are going to be going, okay, and that's going to be it. Give people a brain break so that you can actually bring people along with you. One additional nuts and bolts. Let's talk about collaboration for just a second. Collaboration is helpful for a couple of different reasons. Number one, we all have blind spots. We all have things that we don't see. And if you have some brothers and sisters around you who are just willing to say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about how this is going to sound? And you say it this way, that's helpful. It also helps you get over creative block. Because sometimes you do have those weeks, or you have those months, or years, or decades, or whatever, where other ideas from other trusted folks can be helpful. A couple of nuts and bolts things on collaboration. A few things collaboration needs. It needs trust. It needs respect. You don't just collaborate with anybody. You collaborate with people who you probably have a friendship with. This also leads us to another thing. Collaboration needs time. Been working at Concordia for 6.5 years. I know how Bill thinks sometimes. Bill, you know how I think?
Almost never, Zach.
Oh, okay. Okay, supposedly, okay, if you're not abnormal like me, it helps because you can just begin to get inside each other's minds. And so it just takes some time. It also takes a listening ear. If someone gives you a little bit of guidance or a piece of advice, it's actually good to listen to it and not go, I got this down. Because if that's all you ever do, you know what happens to collaboration? It doesn't go down. It doesn't go up. It goes down. It's also good not to have too many cooks in the kitchen. Okay? If your collaboration meeting has all 25 of your team members and they all are giving their ideas, you know what you wind up with? Sermon stew. Okay? And it's not just the good stuff like the meat. People are throwing in peas and they're throwing in lima beans and all the stuff that you used to pick out when you were a little kid. And so it's good just to have, it's good to have a few people because then you can actually get a direction going. And then finally, sometimes collaboration also does need a break. This is something that Bill is masterful at. If we're collaborating on something and we've been at it for an hour, sometimes he'll say, okay, time to stop. We'll come back to it tomorrow. And that's great because my best ideas come about 4:30 in the morning when I'm out for a jog. And all of a sudden can bring something fresh that we wouldn't have had if we just would have kept pressing through.
Two other things that I want to mention about collaboration. You know, I don't know your context, but I know that you have people around you. There are people in your life. There may be other pastors or other professionals on staff that you can collaborate with, but there are also lay people who have gifts and talents and can be collaborative partners. This is incredibly valuable. I will tell you that we have really been working on this collaboration idea for probably 2.5 to 3 years, and my preaching has improved dramatically. For the ability to think about things and improve things and get a different perspective, it really is a cornerstone of sermon preparation for me now, and I would encourage you to think about and find ways to collaborate that maybe do the very same thing for you. The other thing I'd mention about collaboration is that it doesn't have to end before the first message that you preach. In other words, how many in here preach one time or teach one Bible class and that's it? Okay, you guys have got to work hard to be on because you get one shot at it, okay? But the ability to preach a second or a third message or more than that, you can continue to work. And if you have the people around you, trusted people, maybe members of your staff or maybe lay people who will tell you the truth. You trust them and they will tell you the truth because you don't want the people who are going to tell you that was wonderful no matter what. You can get all kinds of that standing at the door. I'm talking about people who love you and care enough about what you're doing, believe enough in you to know that you can do better every single time you bring that message, so that when you finish, you can go back and say, okay, what did you hear? Did this come through clearly? You know, did that make sense? And they will say to you, you know, that transition was a little fuzzy. That story was awesome, but that transition, what can we do? Maybe we can just add a sentence to that. And you can continue to make, you know, just because the first service people got something lousy, doesn't mean everybody else has to suffer, right? You can make it better. You can make it better. One last thing that I think falls under the topic of collaboration. How many of you have heard me talk about this preaching project, experiment thing that we're talking about? This is an opportunity for collaboration. And for those of you who haven't heard me talk about it, we're putting together a series. And what we have right now for you is an abstract. And the series begins on Easter and it ends on Mother's Day. And the series is called Liar, Liar. And the idea is that in our culture we have all kinds of things that we have come to believe that are actually lies. So for example, on Easter Sunday we're going to talk about YOLO. You only live once. It's a lie. Ultimately, as we deconstruct, the father of lies is the source of this. That's the text for the entire series. So we'll go on and talk about a number of other things that connect to culture and probably give us an opportunity to have some fun. There'll be outlines that are produced and graphics and other things that will be available in the next couple of weeks. But the thought is that this gives us a way to sort of help one another and to make this fun and collaborative, and hopefully raises all of our gifts as we collaborate, makes the whole thing better as we share in this. Is that interesting to anybody? Okay, very cool. Well, there's some of the abstracts that are still back there, but if you're interested, I want you to go to this website. Go to bestpractices.church, not .com, bestpractices.church. And at the top, there's a tab that says Preaching Project. And if you go in there, it gives you a chance to sign up. And by the way, this is not a commitment for anything. This is a way for us then to send you more information and to get you materials, to get you the sermon abstract right away. But you see, in my mind, this is all more than just collaboration on a preaching project. Because if you want to be involved in this, what we would encourage you to do is then also connect your congregation. Because we're going to provide the social media aspects of this, Facebook group and page, and the opportunity for tweets and hashtags and so forth. Because what I love about best practices is that we get a whole bunch of people together who are passionate about Jesus and reaching people with the gospel and helping people become disciples. What if we can take a little part of this and transfer it to social media? So that the people in San Antonio who are hearing these messages are discovering that the people in Detroit and the people in Minneapolis and the people in Phoenix and the people in California and the people on the East Coast, that they're also listening to these messages. And they're talking about the things that impact them and the things they're doing and the results, the acts that have been made and how they're going about making this work in their lives. We create that culture, that social culture across a vast number of people, and maybe we capture just a little bit of the magic of an event like this, where our people realize that they're not just an isolated congregation trying to do something, and maybe they're the only congregation, the only Lutheran congregation like them in the whole region. They discover that they've got brothers and sisters all across the country. And that their pastor is part of something that's moving forward to create a whole different perception of who we are, whole different passion for reaching lost people. So it's more than just a preaching experiment. It's something that I think maybe has great potential. If it's not possible for you to be part of this, we're gonna be doing additional projects. You know, we've got Christ Church Lutheran is involved. We've got a number of other congregations. The seminary is involved with us. Dale Meyer and Ben Haupt and some others. And so, Lord willing, we're going to be able to make this an awesome opportunity, not just for really great preaching, but an awesome opportunity for us to share this Easter season together.
Bill, how much does it cost?
Oh yeah, by the way, that's the bad news. Cost,
Yeah.
get out your credit cards, now put them in your pocket. Nothing, there's zero cost. This is about us working together to try and become better at what we do together.
One additional note on that. If you do go to bestpractices.church, We'll send you the series abstract in short order, but then we'll also have series graphics and bumpers and all sorts of other things that will kind of trickle into you when we get them done. So that way it'll be more than just like a basic outline for a series. You'll be able to have some additional resources, and if they're helpful to you, praise be to God. We're glad. Questions?
Thanks for doing that, for starters. I would really appreciate that. It's great to see something like that. And just for the illustration one, sometimes you get a story that's extremely well written.
Mm-hmm.
What's your opinion about reading a story, short or long? Is it worth the trade-off of doing that? Do you lose the listener? What's your opinion about that? My wife hates it when I do it.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
And your answer is?
Answered your own question.
Yeah.
Here's my feeling about that. Number one, because it's a story that has impacted me, I assume that I can retell the story. Now, there have been times when I've read something, it's always been short, never long, and I've always said, I apologize for reading this to you, but you'll understand how powerful each word is, and I can't do this as much justice as the author. So that kind of sets it up, and it's not the norm for telling a story.
Can I just, a couple of quick things on that? Number one, I would say that should probably just, very practically, kind of be a few and far between event. Number two, what you can do is you can split the difference. Okay? Because there may be a vignette out of the longer story that really drives the point home. And you can kind of tell the story, lead up to that point, and then say, and listen to what this person writes. Boom. And all of a sudden you got 2 or 3 sentences, you land it, the story has the most impactful part, okay, exactly how it was written, and you've set it up appropriately. And so here's the thing when it comes to sermons and stories. The challenge is you want to cut and keep it shorter, and a lot of times it winds up being more impactful. It's the same thing with reading a story. If you can kind of challenge yourself to find that really impactful point, those 2, 3, 4 sentences out of the whole thing, man, that'll be dynamite, rhetorically. So hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank
You bet.
When I got out of school, I went right into a multiple staff
Yeah.
and spent half of my ministry career in multiple staff, and then within the last 6 years now I'm solo. I think my preaching was better when I was in a multiple staff because I had the flexibility of time. I wasn't on every week, and so after about 6 years now, it was kind of a learning curve to kind of just to be on your own since I didn't have that experience for a lot of years. Man, I'm tired. I'm running out of creativity. And it's not just finding a story, an illustration, or something. It's wow, this is a grind that I didn't experience before. And I think maybe the collaboration might be helpful. It seems to me that's something that I had before. So anyway, I think I'm sitting here because I actually enjoy preaching. I love the preparation part of it, but whoo-wee.
Let me expand that collaboration opportunity because, again, sometimes you just need a little bit of a break, right? You just need something that jump starts what you're doing, and so that there are lots of ways to do it. But one way that I would offer to you, every series that we've done for a decade is available online at our website, concordia.cc. And we do the message and the Bible class are on the same text, and they work together. They're not repetition of the same stuff. But here's the thing I would tell you. If you go to our site, and there are lots of great places to go, not just ours, but the offer I would make to you, if you go and you find a series or a message that you like, I remember Rick Warren saying, if my bullets fit your gun, then go ahead and do it. You can do anything from literally saying the exact same words to modifying and editing the Bible class and the sermon in any way you want. And some of them are okay, but some of them are really good. And what I would also tell you is if you want to do that, tell us. Send us a note and say that you want to use the the We Do Marriage series. And we will send you the graphics and the sermon bumper and the adult Bible class in manuscript form. You know, we've got the messages available, you know, in audio or video that you can use. We'll give you everything we've got to hopefully help you. And then you can use what you want and set aside what you don't want. But if that's helpful to you, dear brothers and sisters, we will do whatever we can do to help, because it is a grind. And it gets tiring, but it's oh so very important.
You guys mentioned message timing. What's your service length? What's your normal message time you're shooting for? What's the kind of the balance there?
Typical Sunday morning at Concordia message is 30 minutes. If it's a communion Sunday, we try to get out in an hour 10. If it's a non-communion Sunday, hour 5. For adult Bible class, I get to talk for an hour. That isn't necessarily a good thing, but it's a thing, because it's basically an hour-long lecture. Other questions? Can I leave you guys with 2 questions just to kind of think about? One that actually goes to what you would ask about just a second ago. Question number 1. Just personal development in preaching. Do you listen to other people who preach? There are lots of good preachers out there. One of the things that I will do, anybody in here do any grocery shopping? Raise your hand. Anybody in here ever go to the grocery store or any other kind of shopping? I will put in my earbuds, and I will listen to sermons as I'm buying bananas. And that way, when somebody stops me in the grocery store and says, "Hey, Pastor, how you doing? What you listening to?" "Oh, I'm listening to the Word of God." It makes me, there's the added benefit of making me sound really pious. But no, I will listen to sermons just as I'm going through everyday stuff, right? That way, I'm not just sitting in my study, opening a book and reading very carefully. It's just part of a way, because life does get busy, and it does become a grind, and it does become crazy, okay? And just pop them in and listen. I really hope that you're listening to other people preach, and not just reading what they preach, but actually listening to them, so you understand rhetoric and how they say things, and the pace and the flow and the crescendos and all of those nonverbal things that you get in how a person preaches. It'll help you in your preaching.
Do you have a resource for that?
You know what? There are lots of different places that you can go. One place is actually an app that you can go, and it has a lot of the classic preachers. And so here's what you do. You take on your theological discernment hat, okay, and you go to one place and you find, oh, look, Chuck Swindoll. Now, he's a fairly effective communicator. And you go, wow, that was spot on. Wow, no, we'll change that a little bit, okay? But it's a bunch of different, you can get it right on your iPhone or Android device, okay? Download one place, and it has a bunch of different preachers out there. You'll find ones you like. You'll find ones you go, nah, I don't want to listen to that anymore.
So what is the app, Zach?
One place. So, ONE, one place, yeah.
There's also one podcasts.
Yeah.
And you can just download it.
Yeah.
Tons of sermons.
Yeah. And then if you have a favorite preacher, just sign up for their podcasts. So, then the other question, am I listening to myself preach? And here's what I mean by that. Do you need your own sermons? Yeah. Right? You need to be reminded that you're a sinner in need of a Savior. But also, are you listening to yourself preach literally? I mean, do you take the recording, pop it into your CD player, cassette player, put it on your iPod, and actually listen to it? And go, wow, that was okay. Or, wow, I am not so sure what I was thinking that Sunday morning. That helps. Listen to the way that you speak. Listen to your flow. Listen to your crescendos, your pacing, your stories, how it connects. Because it'll help you to say, yeah, I want to keep doing that, or I want to stop doing that. And you know what? Here's the payoff for this. Okay? The payoff for the Word of God being preached is salvation. Right? Okay. The payoff for the Word of God being preached well, like rhetorically well, is blessing. It's a blessing to the people in the pews. And they're excited, and they can't wait to come back and hear more. I hope that is something that as communicators of God's Word, we can aspire to. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for your Word. Thank you for all the promises that come with your Word. Promises of forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation. I pray that as communicators of God's Word, we would seek to communicate that Word faithfully and well. We would think about not only what we say, but how we say it, so that it would be for the salvation of souls and for the blessing of people. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Thank you, fellas. Thank you, ladies. God bless you.